At last, he's here. But you don't need to fear him, as he is the smiling creeper. And so, this is the story. Long, long ago, deep within the ancient expanse of the Taiga Forest, a storm would arise, and the world would never be the same again. As it was on that dark, rainy night that a horde of creepers were traversing their way through that giant forest. Their mission to wreak havoc and suffering onto the world. And they were going to do that until one of them made a grave mistake. As all those creepers, while they were running through that forest, were just following the movements of one of them. But that creeper that they were all chasing after, well, he couldn't see properly, as the shadows of the night sky concealed his path. And so, for that reason, he didn't see the giant ravine that he was running towards. And thus, he ran into it. And well, as it was just so dark on that night, none of the other creepers realized that the first one had fallen down into that ravine. And so, they all ran into it as well. And so, there was no hope for any of them, as that ravine was a sheer drop. And so, they all fell to their deaths. And so, that was it. That was the end of their story. Well, actually, not quite, as one of those creepers survived, as that creeper had fallen just one block higher than all others. And well, because of that, he took just a little less fall damage. And luckily for him, it was enough to survive. However, despite the fact that he was still alive, he had still sustained serious damage, and so, if he didn't heal up soon, he was going to die. But, not only was he extremely close to death, there was also nothing that he could do to better his situation, as he was stuck there in that ravine, as he couldn't just build up, nor could he destroy the walls to create an artificial staircase to escape, as all he had was his explosion ability. But that would kill him if he activated it, and so all he could do was just stand there and wait. However, things were going to get a whole lot worse before they got better, as after 2 days of just standing there in that ravine, waiting for there to be a set of creepers to walk past and save him, or for him to just heal up, there was a storm. Now, normally, this would have been of no concern for that creeper, as typically, a creeper could just run away from that storm, but not today, as that creeper was confined to that ravine, and he had nowhere to run, and thus he couldn't do anything when the rain turned into a downpour and the ravine began to flood. This was it. He was going to die now. But no, that creeper was determined to survive, and so with all his might he swam and swam, and he remained floating on the surface of that water. Now, this was extremely difficult as the currents were pushing him down, and so he just had to keep resisting in order to stay afloat and survive. Also, over the next 12 hours, that creeper had to constantly be moving in all different directions, as that water was freezing, and he needed to move in order to stop himself from getting hypothermia. And so really, things were not looking good for that creeper, as he truly did believe that he was going to die very soon. But luckily, his resistance to staying alive would all pay off, very soon, as when the sun rose the following morning, the creeper saw it and escaped, as there was an area in that ravine with a waterfall. And so he swam over to that waterfall and he began to climb it. Now, this was extremely hard to do, as he had to fight against the current pushing him away. But despite that, he knew that this would save him, and so, in just a few hours of painfully resisting the flow of water, he was able to traverse his way up that waterfall and out of that ravine. Finally, he was safe, and he could go back to wreaking havoc onto the world at last. Except, no, he wouldn't be doing that. You see, over the last day, as he swam in that ravine, water began to leak inside of him, and that caused the code that he was made from to start malfunctioning. And well, there were two major changes that occurred to that creeper due to this change in code. First, the self-destruct mode in that creeper was removed, meaning he now had the power to create as many explosions as he wanted, all without dying. That was impressive. But the more interesting change was the change that occurred in the AI form brain of the creeper, as his hardwired mission of wreaking havoc and chaos onto the world was removed, and was instead replaced with an inner urge to help the world and spread joy to it. And thus, for that reason, he stopped the snarl of sadness that he had always portrayed on his face, and instead he began to smile with joy, as he was now the smiling creeper. And well, as he understood his new mission of spreading joy, he began to fulfill it. And thus, over the next few days, he travelled the world, smiling and spreading joy to all creatures, from pigs, to cows, to zombies, to skeletons, to phantoms, to even the polar bears. It didn't matter the intelligence of the being, as he was just looking out for all living creatures, trying to make everyone happy as his code dictated. And well, it was working, as any being that had contact with the smiling creeper just felt better with their lives, as the joy that he had just rubbed off onto them. And so, because of that, many creatures were suddenly inspired to be better and do better with their lives, as they were all just so happy now. And so, all was good for the smiling creeper, as he was happy, and all the creatures he met were happy, everyone was happy, and all was good. Until one day, when everything would change for the smiling creeper. As it was on one snowy morning, while the smiling creeper was in the snowy tundra, spreading joy to the foxes and polar bears, that one polar bear, after being exposed to the joy within the world, decided to go back to his favourite place in the tundra. It was the place where he had grown up. However, he just hadn't been back there in years, due to the sorrow and laziness that had engulfed him throughout his life up until this moment. But now, thanks to the smiling creeper, he was different and began to happily head home. But as he did that, he gestured for the smiling creeper to follow him. Now, normally, the smiling creeper wouldn't have done that, as he just had so many creatures he needed to visit in order to spread joy. However, he could also see that this polar bear was just so excited and enthusiastic to show him his home. And well, as he was in the desolate, snowy tundra, he decided, why not? as there weren't really that many beings that lived here. However, when they arrived at his home just a few hours later, they saw something that shocked both of them, as the land that he had once called home, well, it was no more, as it had been flattened to make way for an igloo. That polar bear was shocked, as this was his home, and it was so different now. But still, he was filled with joy, and he almost felt glad to see the change in his homeland, as it meant that someone else was enjoying the land. And so he ran off, happy with his life and ready to make a difference in the world. But that smiling creeper just stood there, thinking what he should do. And well, after a few minutes, he decided to go and investigate that igloo, thinking that whomever built it must be nearby. However, when he was right by the front door of that igloo, he could see it. A trapdoor on the floor, and there was light coming from it. That must be where the being who built this was. And so, the smiling creeper very carefully walked over to that trapdoor, where he then saw that there was a hole leading down. Now, he wasn't sure if he should go down it or not, as it did seem to be rather ominous. But despite that, he still decided to venture within, as what's the worst thing that could happen? However, as he descended down that hole, he could hear it. A zombie and a villager. Oh no, this can't be good, as that villager was likely in serious danger from that zombie. And so, the smiling creeper descended as fast as he possibly could. When he saw it, it was a Steve, and he had trapped that villager and that zombie into cages. That was weird. But still, the smiling creeper saw his new target, the player, and he was determined to spread joy to him. And so, it was then that he began to walk closer to that Steve. But as he did that, the Steve just wasn't turning around, and was in fact ignoring him. And so, the smiling creeper decided to walk in front of him in order to get his attention. However, as soon as he did that, he was suddenly fed a golden apple, as that Steve was trying to save that zombie, as that zombie was a zombie villager. Oh no, he had never eaten a golden apple before, and so the smiling creeper took a step back and began to try and brace for whatever was going to happen to him next. However, he received no harm from that golden apple. In fact, on the contrary, he gained powers from eating that apple, as it charged his wiring, making them more efficient. And so that meant that he had just gained super speed, as well as resistance and absorption and regeneration, all of which were permanent. But this was all just too much for the smiling creeper, as he was never meant to experience any of this, and he just couldn't cope with all these changes and the surge of power that he was feeling. And so he very quickly blacked out. Several days passed when he finally awoke. But when that happened, he very quickly realized that he was no longer in that igloo. Rather, he was in a minecart, and he was being taken somewhere unknown. Now, he tried to escape that minecart by using his explosion powers. However, that just didn't work, as while he did cause an explosion, the blast wasn't powerful enough to destroy the minecart that he was riding, and instead, somehow, poppies just fell on the floor when he activated that explosion. That was weird. And so, the Steve, right at that moment, turned his head around and began to stare at the smiling creeper. And he was wondering how he just did that. But really, it didn't matter, as once he saw those flowers and picked them up, he then saw the awake face of the smiling creeper for the first time. And with that, he was suddenly filled with joy, somehow, as just being around the smiling creeper while he was awake gave the Steve a feeling that he should change things for the better. And so, for that reason, he got out of that minecart, and he stopped the smiling creeper's minecart as well. And then after that, he just felt inspired by the mere presence of the smiling creeper, and thus he began to build a small, picturesque coastal town for him to live in. And he did that non-stop over the next few weeks. And it was beautiful, as that coastal town was everything that he had ever wanted. But it was something that he just never thought that he would be able to achieve. And it was only now, due to the smiling creeper, that he could actually do it. As all doubt and sadness that he had within his soul just vanished when he was around that magical creeper. And so, to celebrate the joy that he felt, that Steve then made sure to build the biggest house in that village dedicated to that creeper, and thus he made that house green and created the perfect environment for the smiling creeper within that house. And so that Steve then lived a very good life with the smiling creeper there in his home, as just the mere presence of that being just filled him with joy and made him determined to be better. And thus, with that, he was able to achieve many great things. But soon, he decided that he couldn't be so selfish with the power of this smiling creeper, and thus he made a decision to spread the word of this magical creeper. And thus he began to travel to hundreds of villages where he would tell them all about this amazing smiling creeper. Now, many villagers were rather skeptical of this being, but despite that, many villagers still decided to go with him. And well, once they saw the smiling creeper, they too were filled with joy and happiness, and were all inspired to just do more with their lives. Now, the smiling creeper would have liked to be freed, so that he could go to the villages himself and spread this joy more effectively. However, that Steve was doing a lot of work spreading the word of the smiling creeper to millions of villages. And so, really, he didn't need to attempt to get away from that house, as there were just so many villagers that flocked over to him, waiting to see him. As the moment that any villager saw him, they too were filled with joy and happiness, and most importantly, they all subscribed. As all the sorrow and sadness and laziness and greed that they had within their souls just vanished, and they were instead filled with pure morality. And so, because of that smiling creeper, those villagers would then go on to do many great things, as it just felt inspired and awestruck to do more. And so it was all going very well, with billions of villagers feeling great about their lives, and they were all making the world a better place. Until one day, when everything changed for the worse, as it was on that day that the Illagers somehow found out about the smiling creeper and his amazing powers. And they saw him as an amazing opportunity to gain control of the villagers. As, well, today, he was a great help to the villagers, allowing their souls to be filled with love and kindness. The Illagers believed that if they could manipulate the smiling creeper and found out how he did all that, well then, they could reverse all of those effects. And then they could force the villagers into a Great Depression, and thus the Illagers could strike them while they were weak, and thus they could gain control of the entire world. And so, it was on that seemingly normal day that the Illagers broke in to their house and they kidnapped the smiling creeper. Now, when they took him, the smiling creeper believed that he could save them, as he thought that he would be able to radiate enough happiness to make the Illagers stop this and change. But he couldn't do it, as the Illagers were immune to happiness. This was bad, very bad, as the smiling creeper couldn't really do much else. And so, for that reason, there was nothing that he could do, as he was taken to the nearest mansion over the next few days. And when they arrived at that mansion, the evil Illagers began to experiment on him, trying to invert his powers. But very luckily, no matter what they attempted, nothing was working, as he just couldn't remove the joy within him. And so, because of that, the joy and happiness that he had was starting to wear off on the Illagers, as the defenses of sorrow and sadness were weakening. Yes, the smiling creeper was getting to them. Maybe he could show them the light, and then they could all embrace joy, and he could go back to helping the world. However, that just wasn't going to happen if the Illagers were in control of him, as they were still resisting with all their might, all the joy that he radiated. But maybe, just maybe, if they weren't in control of him, he could get through to them. And well, that's precisely what happened. As, after a few weeks of the Illagers attempting all those experiments, there was a thunderstorm. And well, due to that thunderstorm, that mansion was struck by several bolts of lightning. Now, normally, that wouldn't be a problem. However, the room where they were experimenting on the smiling creeper, well, it was made almost entirely from iron. And well, as the lightning was attracted to that iron, it didn't take too long for a bolt of lightning to strike that room. And, just as luck would have it, the bolt of lightning would hit the smiling creeper. And so, with that, he received a surge of power unlike anything that the world had ever seen. And luckily, as he remembered the feeling from that first surge that he received from that player all that time ago, he was able to remain calm and overcome the pain from that surge relatively quickly. And so, because he had survived all that, he was able to absorb all the energy from that lightning bolt, and thus he was now supercharged. And because of all the flowing electricity within him, his code was rearranged to be at maximum efficiency. And thus, he had just gained a whole new set of powers. As now, he had the power to grow into a giant and explode with more might than ever before. But more importantly, due to all that rearrangement, he now radiated more joy than ever before. And it was enough for the illagers to turn away from their sorrow and to in fact accept the happiness and joy that he was attempting to give to them. And so, for the first time in a very long time, that the illagers were happy. And so, with that, all those illagers then decided to stop attacking the villagers, as they now saw it as evil and immoral and just wrong. And instead, they decided to spend their resources on developing technology and making life better for all of the illagers. And so, once the smiling creeper saw that all those illagers were happy here and had embraced the light of the world, he left that mansion and he grew into the largest size that he possibly could. And then he began to travel the world, looking out for as many villages and as many mansions as he could possibly find. And once he had found one, he would preach to them about being happy and joyful and doing better. And well, as he was now supercharged, they all listened to him, as whenever they saw him, they all became very happy and productive creatures, determined to be better and do better, taking personal responsibility to making their world a better place for all. And so, for that reason, all attacks on the villagers quickly stopped, and all attacks on the illagers also stopped. And thus, there was now a sudden era of rampant growth and discovery within the world, as all life forms within the world were suddenly determined to be happy and make a difference for their fellow beings. It was amazing, and it was all happening because of that smiling creeper and the joy that he was spreading. And so the world, over the next 150 years, was better than it had been in a very, very long time. As everyone was happy, and the world was growing, nothing was going to stop them, until one day, when the smiling creeper just mysteriously vanished from the surface of the world. And so, with that, all the positive changes they had been able to make on the world were abruptly removed, as all the joy and happiness and rampant growth and discovery, well, it was all over now, as the world quickly devolved into chaos and depravity. And so, to learn what happened next in this new world, you'll need to watch this video.